Welcome to B2B Commerce Corner. Commerce Corner is a sub-series of the E-commerce Edge podcast discussing all things B2B commerce through the lens of agencies, consultants, merchants, and more. Enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the E-commerce Edge podcast with me, Jason Greenwood, your host. And it is my absolute pleasure to welcome our next incredible guest to the podcast, Mr. Richard Turner. And he is the president and founder of Convergence Data Services out of Orlando. Welcome, Richard.
Hey, Jason. Thanks for having me.
It's my absolute pleasure to have you along for the ride with me today. And before we get into what you do, and look, to be fair, you've been at this game for a very long time. You've owned and run Convergence for over 20. You're actually coming up on your 24th year, and PLM World Partner Advisory Committee member, management consultant at Accenture, management consultant at A.T. Kearney. You've been in this game for a very long time, longer even than me. And look, I've been doing this for 25 years. So tell me how you got into this wonderful world of B2B, distribution, manufacturing, consulting, and now ultimately data services of all kinds, PIM, PLM, and data strategy.
Well, I asked myself the same question too, Jason, but I started as a mechanical engineer and I realized I wasn't long for that type of occupation. So went back, got my master's degree and got into manufacturing, started working in consulting, as you'd mentioned, all around the world. And then I realized my true passion was to be an entrepreneur. And I got into starting this data company, Convergence Data, hard to believe, almost 25 years ago. And I've continued to just work in the manufacturing industry. So companies that have both engineering and manufacturing capabilities is where I've always focused for my whole career.
And what's interesting about this is we have formal names for some of these technologies and services and practices. Now, PLM, product lifecycle management, PIM, product information management, MDM, master data management, DAM, digital asset management. You know, when I first started working in this world, these were not formalized practices. They were actually, data was a mess mostly, not only in manufacturing and distribution, but product data was a mess even at retail. And so the reality is, as all of our industries have collectively matured, product data and the quality, depth, and breadth of it, both structured and unstructured product data, has started to really separate the winners from the losers in our market. And this is increasingly starting to happen. You can't look at a Grainger or a Fastenal or McMaster-Carr. You can't look at any of the major players, whether it's in manufacturing or wholesale distribution. You can't look at any of them that are really standout winners that those do not have an incredibly well-defined product data strategy and go-to-market strategy around data. And in every instance, and I'd love your take on this, they treat data as a true asset that is worthy of massive and ongoing sustained investment. And that is a massive change I've seen over the last 25 years, and I've witnessed it firsthand.
Right. No, I mean, you mentioned 2 or 3 companies that have been doing a really good job at it, and really, they are an exception. The other manufacturing companies are miles away from being a Grainger or McMaster-Carr. I was just talking with a manufacturer today. I was looking at their website, and this is what you typically see. You may see an image of a product, and you may see a description, but there's no way to be able to search and find like specific products like valves based on their characteristics for your application, or to see what options you have through a search. It can't be done. It may be PDF files, or it's just images on a website. Then you ask yourself, how do they sell their products? What are they sending to Grainger, McMaster-Carr, and to their distributors? So they're in a real bind, and that's really the majority of the manufacturing companies are way behind the curve in terms of having agile product data to support the future digital economy. Where things are starting to change. Companies are starting to invest in these areas, but it's still behind the curve.
And I think that's what presents such an incredible opportunity for these master distribution agents, wholesalers, sub-distributors, et cetera. The only reason they are able to massively differentiate themselves in the market is because the manufacturing suppliers to them have such wildly variable product data capabilities, and therefore the quality of the data that those distributors receive is massively variable. And so any effort they bring to the table in terms of adding attribution, adding just quality product descriptions, adding search merchant personalization capabilities to their websites, basically the entire product discovery exercise for these distributors is enabled by enrichment that they do themselves over and above the data that the manufacturers supply to them. And in many cases, the manufacturer supplied data is total and complete rubbish. Experience this even in the retail world, which is the first instance of actually implementing a PIM system was actually in the retail world, not in the wholesale distribution or manufacturing world. But even there, with all of our suppliers, we had over 200 suppliers supplying over 25,000 SKUs to us as a retailer. And even us, it took us 12 months just to define all of the attributes we wanted to have across all of our categories and product sets. Then what we had to do is we had to take all of the data that was supplied to us. We had to map it to our version of those attributes, our names for those attributes, our data structure for those attributes. Then we had to go back to those suppliers, whether it's a manufacturer or a distributor. In some cases, we were sourcing off both. And we had to go back to them and we had to say, look, if you want us to list your product on our website, we need these attributes. We can't find them. They're not on the product label. They're nowhere. We don't know what these attributes are. So you need to get us this data. Otherwise, we can't effectively categorize you. We cannot get you onto our site in a meaningful way. And therefore, we can't sell your product. And are you seeing it's more and more where distributors are putting upward pressure on manufacturers and saying, hey, you want us to list your product quick? You want us to start selling your product quick? You got to give us some decent product data. Otherwise, we can't do it.
Yeah. But you're seeing it more on the distributor side. I live on the manufacturing side, and I know what's going on over there. And they are miles away from being able to meet their requirements. And typically, within a manufacturing company, there'll be business units. Like we work with a lot of the top HVAC companies in the world, and they'll have an air division and a water division, and they're all doing their own thing. They have their own tools and their own processes, and a lot of times they are homegrown solutions. They're not scalable, and they're not easy to update, and they're trying to load product data into some legacy system that is not easy to work with. You can't make data model changes. You have to work in spreadsheets. You got to upload the data. There's no one version of the truth. There's so many of those issues, and they're within pockets. These things are going on within pockets of the division of these manufacturing companies. There's no global process. So when we come in with what we do, we try to introduce an enterprise approach that's more scalable and more flexible, and help them with their product data, because syndication is the hardest thing in the world for these manufacturers to do. First of all, you need data against a data model, and then you need to build map it, to your point, to all these different data models in your distribution channels, and that's a huge goal for all of them that they're struggling with. And so they're losing sales, they're behind the curve, and a lot of these manufacturing companies this is the heart of the issue that they're trying to solve.
And I'm seeing businesses actually be put out of business in the manufacturing sector by competitors who have a more modern, especially if a manufacturer is a legacy manufacturer, 100-year-old manufacturer, whatever it is they make. They have a new competitor that comes to market. Maybe they're just a couple of years old or whatever. They're a digital native company. They start from ground zero as an advanced, digitally led, digitally capable business, and they're putting serious pressure on their competitors in the market simply because they have a better product data strategy than their competitors and their peers. Plus, that means that their go-to-market is better, faster, and easier. It also means that their manufacturing, wholesale, e-commerce website can get indexed properly by search engines, and they can be found. When somebody types in, when a distributor is looking for a new supplier of widget X, they're going to go to Google or they're going to go to ChatGPT and they're going to say manufacturer widget X, supplier widget X, and then they maybe put in some regional qualifiers in there. But if your products aren't able to be indexed by the search engines and the GPTs of the world, for all intents and purposes, you do not exist to these manufacturers unless you're at a trade show or something like that where a distributor can discover you in some other way. If they're trying to discover you digitally and you don't have your products either online or they're behind a gated experience or they have crappy product data, it's going to be a real struggle for you as of 2025, isn't it?
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think the challenge in manufacturing, especially companies that manufacture products that are complicated, like in the HVAC industry, a heat pump has 200 attributes, and half of those are numeric attributes: pressure, temperature, performance-related information. And that's very difficult information to manage in any type of system, especially a PIM system that may, as you referenced earlier, that may be born out of retail is not going to work for the manufacturing industry with these complicated products. And now they need to take that numeric data and they need to be able to normalize it against different unit of measure systems on the fly. And that's how complicated it is. It's just very hard to address those type of issues without having, say, a robust PIM system and a robust process that can support these complicated products. And then once you've gathered all this information, you now need to be able to syndicate it out to different distribution channels of different data models, and it just becomes highly complex. And that's really where the pressure is on these manufacturing companies. They're not keeping up doing this with their antiquated tools and the way they do things at a local level versus a global level.
And it was interesting because the first time I ever ran across a PLM system was, I don't know, it was probably 8 or 9 years ago. And the reality is that I'd worked with lots of PIM systems up to that point. I'd worked with lots of ERPs. I'd worked with lots of DAMs. I had worked with a number of different systems and single sources of truth for data, and particularly product data, but I had never worked with, scoped, or architected into the product lifecycle stack, a PLM system. And the first time I ever got my hands on one, I was blown away by the structure and the default out-of-the-box process and structure, and being able to pull in tech packs from contract manufacturers and going from literally a concept or a design all the way through to a finished in production good. And the amount of data that you could get out of that system as the first layer of data that would come into a PIM system, usually supplemented by additional data from an ERP. Of course, you have out of your ERP, your real-time pricing and inventory data. That becomes a really beautiful design pattern for manufacturers to be able to leverage, because these technologies, even up to just a few years ago, were so expensive and so complex. They were just not that user-friendly. But technology has advanced tremendously, even in the last 5 years alone. These technologies specifically aimed at manufacturing and distribution, these technologies have advanced incredibly, and they are just not where you used to have to be $100 million a year manufacturer to be able to even think about affording some of these technologies. They're just not that expensive anymore. And so they're really, to my way of thinking, and I'd love your thoughts on this, there's just no excuse to have rubbish data, no data, or non-localized data. There's no justification for that anymore.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you mentioned PLM system. It all starts with a PLM system for a manufacturer. The PLM system, for people who don't know, it's where you create your products, you create your bill of material, and you do all your CAD design, and you build a product. And there's some gaps in this, in that a lot of the focus in PLM systems is not necessarily around, say, the metadata for the parts and products. It's more around it's a vault for your CAD files. It's a place for you for engineers to collaborate on CAD design. There's a bill of material in there. And we've been working with the PLM vendors, Siemens and PTC in particular here in the US, and we're pushing them harder to do more around supporting the ability to use the metadata in a data model to find and reuse parts. The reason why that's so important, if you look at an HVAC company, like a Lennox or Trane
or whatever,
they spend $6 billion on three categories of parts: compressors, valves, and motors. And they have no ability to share those, and there's duplicate parts all across their company and their PLM system, because within the PLM system, they lack the data to be able to find and reuse parts. And so that's where we come in and help with that. So they can't get past that foundational issue, never mind support marketing for product data for the SKUs they want to sell and e-commerce. There's a complete gap there. So data is a problem on both ends of what we call the digital thread. On the engineering side, there's not enough digital data to share parts. And on the marketing side, they lack the systems to support the e-commerce needs for digital data. So it's just a major problem within manufacturing that these big companies are starting to address.
And when you first go in, okay, I'm a manufacturer, I'm an HVAC manufacturer, whatever, Mitsubishi, I'm a whatever I am, and I come to you and I say, look, we got this real issue here. We know it's an issue. We can see it across the business. It's having a tangible material impact on our bottom line. It's having a tangible material impact on our distributors' abilities to sell our product, to merchandise our product, to command a higher price in the market, because oftentimes better data allows you to command a higher price in the market, because it allows you to identify correct areas of fitment and application. And as a result of that, it allows you to sell more, allows you to generate more demand, and therefore you can command a higher price in the market. And they come to you and they say, look, we're not doing this well. We've got great engineering. We've got great quality control. We have great manufacturing automation, maybe even with robotics and clean rooms and all the things that you would want in a manufacturer in terms of quality, control, etc. But we know we've got this issue and this massive gap between our engineering talent, our manufacturing talent, and ultimately our go-to-market talent. And where do you even begin when you start to talk to these guys? Because you're oftentimes basically in the exact same chair that I am, which is I got to tell them their baby's ugly. And that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, no, I think that we go through the pain points and we meet with them, do a discovery process, go through the pain points, and inevitably we identify that these are the issues. And a lot of times it compounds itself in terms of engineering is doing their thing, procurement is doing their thing, which is collecting data on the same parts engineering is doing, but independently of each other. And aftermarket is doing the same thing too. They got to collect data for parts because they need to support the aftermarket needs. And they're all not, it's just a lot of redundant activity, and it's not global and scalable. And it could easily be that way. They collect the data once to support the digital enterprise, and that's where they need to go. Who owns that responsibility within the company? I think that's the big problem within manufacturing. Is it the chief digital officer? I feel like they're more focused on e-commerce and not looking at integrating the internal operations. But that's the big gap in manufacturing companies today, and that's why they're in the situation they're in. To your point, there's a lot of innovation, but the costs for these products are way too high because of these things we're talking about right now, because they get a proliferation of parts. They're paying high prices for unnecessarily paying high prices on parts. They got redundant parts, redundant inventory. They got too many suppliers. They got supplier quality issues because they have too many suppliers. They got high pricing on direct materials. Direct materials is the biggest cost for manufacturing companies. These are recurring costs. These are parts you put into your bill of material. This is not indirect. These are the big dollar costs. And they don't know how to go after them. They don't know how to integrate these operations to go after reducing those costs. And that's what you're seeing. And I think that's where manufacturers are struggling.
The other thing I'm seeing is that distributors nowadays are very rarely just distributors. They might design and manufacture 10, 20, 30% of their catalog, but then they're a distributor for the rest, the 60, 70% of their catalog. And the reason why I think this is changing is because distributors are getting smart. They realize we don't want to just sell SKUs. We want to sell solutions, right? And in order for us to do that, and in order for us to differentiate, we can't manufacture our entire million SKU catalog. We understand that, but we're gonna manufacture and design the stuff that we're real good at and that we know inside out. But then we're going to supplement this with supply from many others, so in some cases, thousands of other manufacturers or distributors, and we're going to distribute entire solutions into the market alongside some form of maybe field services, design install services, maintenance services, some sort of services layer that goes along with that. So they become a manufacturer, distributor, and a services layer provider to the market, to the industry. And this is so standard. I can't actually remember a conversation I've had with a distributor recently that doesn't manufacture at least some of their catalog. So I feel like this problem gets exacerbated when you are playing the role of manufacturer and distributor and field services provider. Now, all of a sudden, you've got the additional problems of that fitment piece that you were talking about, the aftermarket piece, the services piece. Now, basically, as that flows downstream, all the data issues flow downstream from manufacturing all the way through the channel, all the way down to the services layer and everywhere in between. So it has to start, the solution, to my way of thinking, has to start at the manufacturing layer.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's interesting you mentioned the distributors and that they're acquiring other businesses and selling. Like Amazon's obviously doing it, right? So you got to be careful when you go to search for something in Amazon. Is this a company they bought? Is that coming up as the first thing in the search? I think that's what the plan is there with Amazon. And the advantage that the distributors have is they're better at producing data that the manufacturers can't produce. So they have a good way of, which I believe they do have a good way of onboarding these acquisitions and quickly digitizing their data, what the manufacturers can't do. That gives them a huge advantage in the marketplace. So that's why the manufacturers really need to do something about it, or they're going to get beaten by these distributors that are selling competing products because they've got the digital data to service all the channels that manufacturers don't have. Yeah, it's I'm curious to see where it all goes, but it's like I said, all these companies have a ways to go. They are making a concerted effort. They're bringing in management consulting firms to help figure out these issues. We're trying to integrate these operations. We're telling them, if we're going to do this data work, we need to do it across all your operations because that's going to double and triple the value proposition for the organization. You got to stop doing things at a functional level. You got to work like one company, and those things take time. But those are the issues that we see every day.
And are you primarily a services company working with partner platform technologies, partner PIM technologies, partner PLM technologies, or are you also developing your own software for industry as well?
Yeah, we've always had a platform. It started off as a platform to support parts for PLM. And then we started sticking our noses into aftermarket. Like, they need a lot more data than engineering does. And procurement needs data too for sourcing and running RFPs. If they want to run an RFP on multiple products, they struggle with getting the data. We've always had a platform, and in the last 5 years, it's become a PIM platform that happens to support both parts data and product data. That's what makes us unique, in that we're always been focused on manufacturing. We're not going to go and compete in retail. That's not a vertical for us. Manufacturing is our vertical, and that's our lane that we stay in, and that we can support the entire kind of digital thread. We understand the requirements across the organization. And we also help with bringing in the data services. If they don't have the resources to collect all this information, our platform can host a data factory, and we can quickly scale and help them scale like what they've not been able to do. Inevitably, we have to come in and redo their data model, where it's gone completely in the wrong direction. We fix their data model, we set up a data factory, and we enhance all the missing information against the new data model, and then give them a more flexible platform for syndicating data out to their e-commerce verticals. And it's several stages to the project, but it really starts with stage one, or phase one is get the data right. Phase two is keep it right, which is the long-term data governance. If you don't have phase two, you're just going to go right back to where you were in the beginning. And that's what we help companies do, is we get their data clean, get it right, and then we help them with a governance process so that on an ongoing basis, they have the guidelines and the rules for the data, the standards, and the organization is working together. The data model for the organization is supports all the different functions of the company. That's the ultimate model that we try to promote with our manufacturing companies.
And what I've seen in distribution and in retail, for that matter, that has improved data quality, generally speaking, is the fact that there are stage gates, minimum levels of attribution at each stage of the product lifecycle. They will have oftentimes minimum levels of attribution per channel, per market, per product category, etc. They will set up the workflows. They will set up the automatic assignments as it goes through the enrichment workflow with the merchandising teams, with the commercial teams, the marketing teams, etc. They'll be assigned as they go through those enrichment workflows, and they are literally stopped from going to channel until they meet this minimum level of standard to where there is some consistency across the product data set across the entire company. And are you seeing that this, for manufacturers, starts at the PLM level, and it says basically, in order to enforce this and in order to make sure that this happens with monotonous regularity, we actually literally have to force this on the engineering teams. We have to force this on the design teams. We have to force this on the manufacturing teams. And we have to make sure that, look, a product literally cannot progress to the next stage of design and manufacture until these 53 boxes are ticked.
Yeah.
And you can't do that, then your product's never going to make it to market.
Yeah. And that governance process is not in place, which is crazy. And it needs to be put in place. And the way you onboard parts, products, or even an acquisition or a company you just acquired, you have to have a formal process that you bring them into. And you have to have, there has to be a negotiation on the release of a new part. Wait a minute, why are we yet releasing another motor when we buy 2 billion motors and we got 10 of them that are very similar to what you, no one's questioning these requests because there is no governance process in place for parts and then for products, getting everybody together with a good data model and making sure we're collecting the right information against the right data model in one place. And we have a master data set that we all have visibility to, that all those, if those governance processes are not in place, they're never going to get there. And so that's the goal, is to get to that point. It's going to take a while to get these companies to work that way. Like I said, there's a lot of functional silos and a lot of different business groups that never been integrated properly into an operation. For those companies that have grown through acquisition, and they're not working like one company at all. And so they're not getting the economies of scale, and their costs are high because of it. And they're late to the market, and they have high costs. This is typically the root cause to a lot of those issues.
And do you think that tariffs and, I guess, the changing global order, for lack of a better term, and the fact that supply chains are increasingly becoming more local, and they're needing to become more local, they're needing to do more nearshoring, onshoring, reshoring. There's this big drive, particularly in the United States, particularly under Donald Trump, but this is happening everywhere in the world, where globalism is a failed experiment largely. And I think that's been proven out. And I think that national sovereignty is very important. Being able to be nationally independent as any nation, trying to be supply chain independent as possible. I think the whole world now realizes, particularly during COVID, that there is incredible risk when 90% of the world's raw material supply chain and finished goods supply chain is based out of China. And everybody globally since then has been scrambling to co-locate, relocate, reshore manufacturing locally in their countries. And do you think that and unfortunately, what's happened is a lot of those supply chain management skill sets have been lost. They've been lost in Mexico. They've been lost in the US. They've been lost because effectively we have completely outsourced everything to do with supply chain to China for so long that these are skills that people are going to have to relearn. And this is a major issue I see when I go into work with manufacturers and distributors. Are you seeing the same?
Yeah, a lot of our customers are global. And one of the things we've done is we set up a global catalog to get them to start to share some of the things they're buying across the different operations, China, Mexico, US. And inevitably, China's getting good pricing, say, on motors. And so the other divisions will align their spend to China. But I think the important part is, that's not going to work with tariffs, right? But I think the important part is that you're agile enough that based on whatever regulations or global regulations that are out there that you need to work against, you can basically pivot to, okay, now we need to start buying these at a different country where we don't have tariffs. But it's hard if you don't have all the data, you don't see all the items that you're buying, what countries and suppliers you're buying from, and you can't group them because you don't have the data to do that. It's hard for those companies to be responsive to these changing legislation. I think that's something that we're seeing that's making it hard on the manufacturers, so it's ongoing.
And it's all fine and good for a manufacturer to realize they've got these gaps, and it's all fine and good for them to bring you in for a large big bang project where you revamp all their governance, all of their data dictionaries, all their attribution models, taxonomies, et cetera. It's all fine and good for you to come in and do that. But at some point, it feels like they have to develop some sort of internal capability around this. They can't be 100% reliant on you forever. Sure, maybe from a technology perspective, they can use your technology, but it feels like they really have to upskill internally around some of this stuff, and they have to develop people and or teams within these companies that can really take some super strong level of governance and ownership over this stuff. Otherwise, I don't see how it's going to be durable within the business over the long term.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's not a technology issue. Like you said, it's governance, it's process, it's working like one company. And it's a big step for a lot of these manufacturers. And that's the one they need to take to be more agile, to be more responsive to service this digital economy. I saw that blog you posted last week on B2B e-commerce sales. It's only going up. It's going to be, and it's a big target for them to hit. And it's there. It's reality. It's a huge growth market for manufacturers that they need to figure out how to go after it.
And what kind of, let's say you're a mid-market manufacturer, you're doing $500 million a year in sales. Today, you're primarily headquartered in the United States, and you've never really had good data governance. You maybe do manufacturing in 3 or 4 countries. Maybe you work with contract manufacturers. You do the design, they do the manufacturing to your specifications. So you ship the raw materials or the components to the contract manufacturer. They assemble and then they send it to you. And then you get it off to your distributors, or you ship directly from contract manufacturer to distribution. Where do they typically even identify that they have this? Because if they've been doing it the same way forever, right? Let's say they're a 25 or 50-year-old company. They've been doing this stuff the same way in spreadsheets, Google Docs, Google Sheets, whatever, for so long that they might not even necessarily know where the problem is. So where is the pain point? Where does it usually arise in their business that causes them to try to go out to market or type into ChatGPT? What keywords are they even looking for to find someone like you to come in and give them help with these kind of challenges? What are the nexus of the problem?
Yeah, I think that's part of our challenge. Is there isn't, we were talking earlier, B2B e-commerce conferences. For these big manufacturers, it's really more about the trade shows. They all have a presence at the trade shows, and e-commerce is one of many things that they're talking about there. And I think that needs to develop. It needs to be, I think the B2B e-commerce conferences needs to grow. And I think that it's in its infancy right now. And I think that would be the place where manufacturers could go. It's places where we could go and present ourselves. And that's just starting to evolve, because right now we're going to trade shows to make ourselves known, because there really isn't a strong, within the US, we're not seeing really strong B2B e-commerce events for manufacturers, because it's always been retail. They've always the ones that have gotten all the attention, and now manufacturing needs their events, and they need a place to go to figure out how they can solve this problem. It is not there right now from what we see.
Yeah, and I think even having standardized terminology, I think that's what the B2B EA, the B2B E-commerce Association, is working real hard to try to help with some sort of minimum standard of knowledge around the world for manufacturers and distributors, so that we're at least all singing from the same song sheet in terms of how we refer to certain things in the B2B supply chain world. Right. We need to be using similar terminology, at least, so that one party is not using completely different language to another party, and then we got random digital people over here using retail terminology. That will never work. That's a large part, frankly, of what I do. When I first started my business, and for the first 2 years of my consultancy, I only worked with B2B suppliers. That's it. But then I had more and more SIs, agencies, platform vendors, investors that wanted to work in the B2B space come to me and say, hey, we know you work with suppliers, but can you work with us too? Because, okay, let's say you're a 20-year-old e-commerce agency, but you've only ever worked in retail, right? You've only ever worked in D2C, B2C, but you want to expand in B2B because you think, hey, there's a really good opportunity here. We've got some real good tech chops, but we don't even know how to talk to manufacturers and distributors. We don't use the same language. We don't use the same technology. Can you come in and help us decide which platforms we should be working with that will work for the B2B sector? And can you teach us kind of the language we need to be using with these people so that we don't sound like we alienate our customers real fast if we use retail language with them. If I use retail language with a manufacturer, the trust evaporates instantly, right? If I'm a pump manufacturer and the data set you have in your demo systems is fashion retail products, you instantly lose credibility. And is that an area where you think, like, where do you see the industry being able to bring some sort of universal level of knowledge to where we get on the same page?
Yeah, I think it's consortiums, it's conferences. I think it's just emerging, because I wish I had the answer, because that would be the place where we'd be going. Like I said, we're having to go to trade shows for HVAC and trade shows for specific verticals, and then meet marketing and salespeople, and inevitably find out, to your point, they're struggling with this, and they're glad that we have met them at a conference, and they weren't expecting to meet us at the conference. We're unique. If you look at all the other companies that are there, they're suppliers of parts. They're not us. They're not software companies that help solve e-commerce product data problems. I think that's a big problem right now, and I think what's happening is the manufacturers are trying to solve it themselves. They're building homegrown solutions. They're working with consulting companies, but they're not scalable, and they're doing it differently across different businesses. It's not an enterprise approach, because there isn't somebody in a company they need to have someone within the organization that's driving it at an enterprise level, and that's just starting to emerge. It's just so many things that are not happening that's going to get them to the level of what retail is doing. They're just so far behind the curve. And I think things are going to change a lot. As you sent out in your blog last week, the B2B commerce growth is there, but the organizations need to match it. And I think there's a mismatch right now to achieving that growth curve. They're going to be really challenged.
Yeah. Do you think there's a role, like, for example, AEM, they're huge, Association of Equipment Manufacturers in the United States. Now, they specifically work in construction, agriculture, heavy duty equipment, tractors, all that sort of stuff. So there are some, I guess, vertical specific or category specific manufacturing organizations, trade associations, et cetera, coming to market. But to your point, they all seem to be pretty verticalized. And so there isn't necessarily one group that sits across all of them and says, okay, we're the unifying body here to get us all on the same page about minimum standards of data quality, minimum standards of digital capability, minimum standards of training and certification. That really doesn't exist yet. And so do you find that, for example, you effectively have to go and become a member of AEM? You have to go and become a member of all these different trade shows. And then
it's really hard to do. It's hard to do all that.
Too. It's super expensive.
Yeah, it's super expensive. Yeah. And how do you sell? There's so many ways these big manufacturers, if they're commercial products, their sales channel is so much different than if they're residential products, right?
Yes.
Commercial, it's contractors. It's as they bring in their contractors, they train them in the products and they go out and service and install them. And then on the other end of the spectrum, it's residential and it's distributors and it's digital data. Right now, we're working primarily on the residential side, and commercial's more configure to order, work with contractors.
DQ, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So I think inevitably the commerce conferences have to line around. So for manufacturing, if you're selling to retail and residential, where you need, I think that's a conference that's going to be quite different than on the commercial side of a business. They're probably not going to want to attend that event because their sales model is different. So we are seeing that quite a bit with the manufacturing companies, that commercial is quite different than residential for, say, HVAC. And I think a lot of businesses are that way, whether it's defense or whatever it is. It's just a different sales model. But inevitably, they're all going to need to be able to digitize their data to be more nimble and respond to sales opportunities. But I think the retail is driving it right now.
And have you found much success and I have, so I'd love your take on this, that some of the major ERP-focused conferences, NetSuite, SuiteWorld, SAP Sapphire, there's 10 major, there's Dynamics Con, there's a few others, there's the Odoo conference, there's a few enterprise class manufacturing and wholesale distribution ERP-focused conferences, and it feels like that would potentially be quite a good nexus, because then you're across lots of different industries, lots of different verticals, but especially for the ERPs like your Infors of the world and some of your other heavy duty, your IFSs and your real heavy manufacturing focused ERPs, it feels like some of their national conferences might be a decent nexus to get some, because the reality is with these B2Bs, the ERP is still the beating heart of their business. Whether they got a PLM or a PIM or anything else, they live and die by their ERP. So it feels like that's a pretty good nexus.
Yeah, ERP is the biggest investment for sure. I agree. It's an enterprise solution, and I think what would complement it is an e-commerce capability. They need to go hand in hand. ERP runs the operation. E-commerce drives the revenue. We've contemplated doing some of the enterprise ERP conferences, especially here in Orlando. I think, to your point, I think that we would bump into people that are trying to solve some of the e-commerce issues there. So I think that, that's another way to attack it, is those type of conferences. Look at what we're talking about. There's so many different types of conferences. That's the challenge that we have. It's hard for companies to find us because we don't know where to go and find them.
Yeah.
We need to figure this thing out. I didn't realize manufacturing would be so complicated when it came to promoting our capabilities. A lot of times the work that we get is just from one company to the other, people changing jobs. And they bring us in, they know what our capability is. We know we're a niche player in this area. Eventually the conferences will be there and then we'll get the visibility, but it's just not clear right now, where those events are.
And for you guys, from a software perspective, your software, it sounds like it's evolved to almost be a pure PIM system. Because of all the PLM dependencies, do you have a select set of manufacturing specific PLM systems that you partner with, or is it your vision ultimately to bring all that PLM capability into your PIM system as well?
Yeah, no, we don't. We definitely don't want to be a PLM system. They're quite complicated in everything they do.
Yes.
But it's a real challenge to. The interesting thing is PLM. There's only 2 or 3 PLM systems that dominate 80% of the market in the U.S., whereas in the PIM, there's hundreds.
Yes.
They're so totally different. They're totally different. So we know the PLM industry really well because there's so few of them. And so it's still a challenge for us to work with them. This is where our area is one of many things that they need to be responsible for. So I think that's part of the problem. It's not a top priority for them. So it's interesting. It's an interesting dynamic where we catch ourselves between e-commerce and PLM, and they're just so different. What needs to be done is you need to be able to integrate the digital data all the way, like the digital thread, as I mentioned, engineering all the way through to e-commerce. No one's really doing that, solving that problem. And I think that's where the big opportunity is, to connect those dots and drive digital data all the way through the different functional areas of a business.
Richard, we'll pick back up where we left off after we were so rudely interrupted by a power outage here at my house in Mexico. So thank you for your patience. But we were talking a little bit about the fact that you don't want to add PLM capabilities or functionalities to your PIM system, and that's not a space you want to get into. You work with the 3 or 4 major PLM platforms that are out there in the market that are targeted at the manufacturing sector. And maybe you can share with us, I guess, what are those PLM systems, and do you guys partner with them to help implement them if a manufacturer needs a PLM?
Yeah, we offer somewhat of a unique or niche service for the PLM vendors. So there's really 3 in the U.S. There's Siemens, there's PTC, that really the 2 primary ones, and Dassault, who has a bigger presence in Europe. But those are what I call the big 3. Whereas PIM, there's hundreds of PIM vendors. So it's easy for us to have partnerships with the PLM vendors because there's a few of them, and we work very closely with them, and we're pushing them to make changes in their product to support more of. So we can deliver data at a high volume because we're building these big catalogs, and we want to put a lot of this data into the PLM system, and ideally to make it easy for engineers to find and reuse parts is the value proposition that we provide for the PLM system. So the PLM systems, in many ways, are just a shell that you can start to put all your CAD files in. You can create workflows. You can have change management. You can build materials. It does all those things. It does a lot of things, more than that even, and we'd never want to get into that world, but our focus is really the data around parts and making it easy to find and compare parts, reuse parts, look for where there's opportunities to rationalize parts or near duplicate parts. And so that's our big focus. And you need a data model to do that. You need to categorize similar items, just like we do for PIM. We need to do the same thing for PLM, but it's more around parts. And that data model for parts should be broader than just engineering. That's the problem we have with PLM, is it's primarily used by engineers. And procurement needs the data for the parts. Aftermarket needs the data for the parts. And we really should be building a data model that supports all 3 of those functions. You're making an investment in improving the data. You want to make sure you're supporting all 3 of those functions. And the challenge we have, as I mentioned earlier, is who looks across these 3 organizations to make this all happen. There really isn't typically that person. So it's our best deployments when we're working in PLM is we're working minimally with procurement, and they're getting the data they need to manage the supplier spend, the direct material spend. That's one of the biggest, as I mentioned earlier, the biggest spend components for a manufacturing company. So if we develop a data model that supports them as well, they can manage their costs for their suppliers better. And then we have less duplicate inventory, less suppliers. It all snowballs to less direct material costs. And the PLM vendors it's hard for them to support us because the data model we create, it changes all the time as companies grow through acquisition, and they don't really have a flexible architecture to support the metadata that we can do. So we're trying to figure out a better integration with our PLM partners to allow our product to work more seamlessly with it, especially if you're onboarding acquisitions and you're bringing in large data sets. And I think the ultimate objective for these manufacturing companies is you share one PLM, and then you're sharing parts, and you get the economies of scale. And so they do make it challenging for us we can do it. We don't have a problem with it. We have the flexible architecture to make all those changes. We just need to figure out a better integration with the PLM vendors. But we've grown up in PLM, and then we've just extended everything we do for parts into products. And we were a natural fit because products are complicated in manufacturing, and we understand the technical nature of manufacturing products. So it was just a logical fit for us to become a PIM system for manufacturing companies. So that's the world that we've been living in for the last 25 years and know well. The PLM vendors know us really well, have a lot of respect for what we do, and they know we enhance the value proposition for PLM, and we're putting high quality data into it. So we do get good support, at least from the sales side of the PLM with the PLM vendors, but we don't necessarily get the priority from the product marketing, the product management side.
And so you guys will go in, you'll do discovery, you might even help these manufacturers with search and select for a PLM. You'll then, once they've made that decision, that you can help them do the data architecture for the PLM. You'll help them do the implementation of the PLM, and you'll help them do the system integration between the PLM and your PIM system. And then presumably there's some supplementary data that will typically come from an ERP or multiple ERPs. In the case of some, they might have 5 or 10 or 50 global ERPs that are also feeding in supplementary data into your PIM system. And then your PIM system can sit between their technology layer, their distributors, as well as slice and dice the data for digital channels, websites, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And it's kind of like what you've just described. You've nailed it. But it's a new space. It's not even being advertised. It's a space that exists. It's like kind of working between the PLM and the e-commerce teams. Is not a defined space today. And that's the space that we sit in. And it has a huge value proposition. We talk to all our manufacturing companies. I know our value proposition is huge when you have high quality data and you can influence direct material spend with high quality data. They're all on board with engaging us. That's exactly where we fit. And it's an interesting, unique niche for us that we enjoy doing this type of work. And it's just so different than any other industry vertical like retail or banking or even the food processing. It's just quite different. The manufacturing side is just a different animal altogether.
It certainly is. I couldn't agree more. Now, do you consider yourself, obviously you're a software company, but you're also a professional services company. You come in, you do these big bang projects, you help with a discrete piece of work. Do you also offer managed services over the long term? So for example, a monthly, like a retainer service where they can come to you and they can rely on you for long-term assistance with this practice of data management within the business and data governance reviews and all those sorts of things. Is that something you help businesses with long-term?
Best practices model is really, we do that work up front, but inevitably we want our clients to have this competency that we have. So we need to basically teach our clients to manage their own data governance, to take control over this whole process. And they can continue to use us. If they need data factory work, they've got a big acquisition and they need extra bodies to do that, we could bring our team in to do it. But the best practice model is they take ownership and they run this on the long term. And it's a competency that becomes within the company that drives a lot of value for all those different functional areas of the business. You really can't hand it off to us to do that really long term, or any vendor. They really need to own this. And we can be capacity for when they have large data sets to process. We could come in and do that, but that's our best practices model. Turnkey is the most expensive, where we're doing everything. And sometimes clients like that. But inevitably, they need to take over and run the show.
Needs to be some form of knowledge transfer. Couldn't agree more. What's next for you guys? Is there anything either your software doesn't do today, or from a services perspective, you don't yet do today? I guess you've been in this game for a really long time, but are there any gaps in what you do for clients that either they're saying, hey, you do all these things, but you don't do this for us today. Can you help us with this? Or are there any of the gaps in the market that you say, we don't do this today, but give us 6 months and we will be doing these 3 other things, for example?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different things. AI, obviously with AI, there's a lot of, it's just evolving in this area. So there's a lot of things that we're looking at doing with AI. It doesn't solve all the problems easily, but it can be deployed in different places, right? It can give you intelligence on the data you have in there. It can tell you where the data errors are. It can profile what's in your database. It can be an agent to tell you, you can ask any questions. It can tell you what's going on. They can do auto translation. They can do data transformation. So picture you acquire a company and they have their data model. And we have what we call a smart feed, which allows you to map the 2 data models and bring that data in. And AI could also help automate a lot of that. It can automate the mapping between the data models. It could identify all the errors in the data, because if you bring data in from a third party or another acquisition, inevitably it needs to be normalized to your standards. And AI can start to do a lot of that in a more automated fashion. And those are some of the things that we're looking at doing now, that we started doing now. And I think that's going to obviously be the future. I always tell our guys, if we're not doing AI, eventually we're going to die. So we're going to do AI. It's AI and data go hand in hand.
They sure do. And I tell you, I'm seeing every single software vendor and services provider bend over backwards to try to get as much AI automation into their technology as possible to make it easier for their customers to do business with them. Makes absolute sense to me. Listen, this has been a fabulous conversation. I've learned a ton. You're working so deeply in this space and have done for so many years. Your experience, you've got a wealth of experience. How big is your team? Because this is such a niche skill set.
Yeah.
This is such a niche capability. It feels like I know what I do is super niche as well. And although I've got some technical partners, I've got some SI partners, et cetera, at least for my direct services to my clients, I have to provide those services because I have yet to find anybody in 25 years doing this that can do what I do the way I do it. And it's one of those things that feels almost impossible to hire for. Do you find the same thing?
Yeah, no, I agree. We have to train all the people that we hire. They don't necessarily come in with the skill set. So taxonomy and understanding a navigation taxonomy or a taxonomy for manufacturing products is not a skill set that we can find easily. So we have to bring those people in, train them in our software, in the best practices. And so, yeah, it's not the easiest skill set. And we're doing the same thing with our customers. I think AI will also help speed up that process, the training process. It can be more just in time. So I think, and a lot of our resources are out there in India. And so where we can, we try to outsource like the larger data sets to our India team. They work in our software and they can scale fast and do hundreds of thousands of parts, millions of parts for some of our customers. And we can do that at scale. And then our taxonomists kind of manage those projects and work between our India operation and our customers to make sure their requirements are being met. Yeah, we have project managers, we have taxonomists, we have an engineering team that does all the integrations like you talked about, because we could integrate with the ERP system, we could integrate with the e-commerce platform. We got to set up feeds with their suppliers. We consider ourselves a one-stop shop, and that we have all of those resources. We bring those to the table. And it's not like, here's our software and have at it, unless they've been doing it a long time and they need like a better PIM and they get it, we can train them. Inevitably, we have to do some of these. Inevitably, they need help with their taxonomy. It's gone sideways. We got to redo it. Once you redo the taxonomy, it means there's data work that needs to be done to align the taxonomy. Once we've done all of that, we can hand off the project to our clients. But so in Orlando, there's 15 of us in Orlando that are running these projects and doing the development work. And we have over 200 resources in India that we outsource a lot of the data work to, where it makes sense to outsource.
Wow, that is an impressive operation. And I'm guessing some of the people on your team are like data analysts and data scientists as well?
Yeah, if you have a strong interest in data and you like working in Excel, that's usually the prerequisite, and we can build out that skill set from there. But that's really it. You just have to have a real interest in doing data work.
I love it. And you have to have an interest in B2B operations and manufacturing in particular. Otherwise, you're probably going to struggle. If you don't like that stuff and you don't like learning about that stuff, you're probably going to struggle.
Yeah. It's a unique skill set, but it's a good industry. We enjoy working in this vertical. We love our customers. And it's exciting times, right? There's lots of growth that's ahead of us.
$8 trillion a year business in B2B just in the United States alone. So
growing faster than AI. Did you see that in your blog? It's going to grow faster than AI, which is crazy to think. E-commerce is outpacing AI.
And it's something like 10x the rate of growth of traditional retail e-commerce until at least 2030. So the opportunity is just nuts. So yeah,
up to retail.
we're in the right space. Let's put it that way. It feels real good. Listen, this has been absolutely fascinating. I've learned an absolute ton. You've been a joy to speak with. Now, as we do come down to the end of our time together, this is where I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you. I get to let you ask me one question, any question you like. Could be personal or professional. Mr. Richard Turner from Convergence Data Services. What is your question for me today?
So we do a lot of work in HVAC. What other industry or manufacturing vertical you think is going to, in your opinion, that shows potential growth for e-commerce? Because I'm curious to get your input.
All of them are certainly harder. Some are certainly harder to digitalize than others. I've worked across automotive. I've worked across industrial machinery. I've worked across belting and plumbing and piping. I've worked across pumping and valving equipment. I've worked across pretty much everything. Like you literally can look around your house at every single manufactured thing, and there is just opportunity absolutely everywhere. 71% of B2B buyers in the United States today are millennial or Gen Z. So these people are digital natives, and they're unfortunately on the supply side, both the manufacturing and the distributors oftentimes are legacy businesses. They're family-owned businesses. They're 50, 75, 100-year-old businesses. Sometimes they're now being run by the second and third generation after the founders. And they do things the old way, and we've got the buyers doing things or wanting to do things the new ways, and never the twain shall meet, unfortunately. And without that digital bridge of digital data, the two will never meet. And so this is just a constant challenge, and that's why I'm putting out content as frequently as I can about this, to say, if it's a grandchild of the founder that's coming to run this business and they look around and they go, I'm a digital native, why do we do things this old school way? There are better ways to skin the same cat. The juice is worth the squeeze, is what I like to say. And I can cite as much data as I like. I can cite many research studies, as many Forrester reports as I like, and everything else. But the reality is, it comes from the top. And if the leadership is not bought in to a digital future of their business and the need for a digital future for their business, it will never, ever happen. And I just move on. I move on to the next one, because there's enough businesses out there that get it and are ready to digitalize that I focus on them, because I don't ever try to sell the unsellable. And I never try to drag someone kicking and screaming towards a digital future. And if they don't see it, then I wait for them to see it, and then they can come to me and have a chat with me, and I'll help them. I'll bend over backwards to help them modernize. But I just see it across every single manufactured good on this planet needs to be digitalized in some way, shape, or form. And even from a supply chain perspective and from a digital twin perspective, everything needs to be digitalized anyway for supply chain efficiency. So we got to get there. And it's people like you and me that are trying to we're running as fast as we can to help as many businesses as we can get there.
Sounds good, Jason. I appreciate you inviting me to this. It's been a great opportunity, so thank you.
Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.